Good day. Welcome to another episode of Stuck in the Middle with Palan, a podcast where we discuss issues of ambivalence, uncertainty, and find ways and means to proceed with meaningful conversations to find resolutions. And today we're going to talk about a very good book, No Ordinary Disruption. And what are the four trends that affect the world moving on into the future? And to discuss with us, we have an incredible guest. Age of 19, she co founded a company, UnBound, an edtech with augmented reality, talking about financial literacy, and she has scaled it so well. And I think she is one of those young people who are going to create waves into the future. And the book itself, No Ordinary Disruption, it talks about four key trends. It talks about beyond Shanghai, urbanization. It talks about technology. It talks about the most important thing, which is the aging population. And finally, we talk about trade, finance, people, and data flows in an interconnected world. Welcome
Thank
to
you.
Stuck in the Middle. And today we're going to talk about No Ordinary Disruption. And the book itself basically talks about look, what are the trends reshaping the world? And it says we are resetting the economy, we are resetting the world. And obviously, you know, the change is happening and the impact is huge. Maybe the last time when our world underwent a very massive shift, it was the Industrial Revolution.
Yes.
But now the impact is 3,000 times
Bigger.
far bigger, and I think we are beginning to see the impact of change. And in the book itself, they talk about four things: beyond Shanghai, the age of urbanization. They talk about the impact of technology, and they talk about something: the aging population, declining fertility rates, and finally, the flows in an interconnected world: trade, data, people, how these things flow. So, Natalia, can I just ask you this? We are seeing these technology and global shift changes happening. So, how is this rapid pace of disruption reshaping the way organizations operate and compete today?
I really like the four pillars that you're talking about because it underlines our entire economic foundation, right? So our entire
Sure.
foundation is basically built on GDP,
Sure.
gross domestic output. Or basically, we're trying to create more in a world that does not have the ability to give us infinite resources, right?
Yep,
Resources
correct.
are scarce. But at the
Right.
same time, we're constantly chasing growing bigger, growing better, having more people so that we can have more output. But in a world where we're faced with limited resources, an aging population, and technological disruption, I kind of feel like it's time for us to rethink the way our economy is put. Well, the first thing is it's okay to have an aging population, to be honest. If we reframe our understanding from trying to push out the biggest and bestest technology or the biggest output or GDP, what we can look at is trying to build efficiency via technology.
True.
At this particular moment, I think a lot of people are worried about the concept of artificial intelligence, right? That's like a big buzzword now.
Which is another huge
Disruptor.
disruptor.
It's
Yeah.
so true. And everyone's saying, I'm worried that AI will take over my jobs. But that's with the understanding that we are going to keep the same amount of population that we have,
Sure.
right? But with the increasing efficiency and effectiveness of artificial intelligence, what we're noticing is organizations are starting to shift into allowing AI to hold that menial task, those administrative tasks that were once laborious for the average person, where you had to put in ones and zeros into your accounts or even fill in names, and that leaves a lot of space for human error. And to be honest, how I feel that organizations have been changing is actually recreating or redefining the way humans are. It's actually making our work more meaningful. right? Instead of spending our time writing ones and zeros, now we're actually starting to build more value into organizations, such as building the human connection, building empathy into our technology, or even the way we're living. It's kind of, if you think about it, from the caveman times where they started growing their own food, so then they stopped having to forage all the time. They left so much more time for precious activities such as connecting and creating community. Similarly, I feel like artificial intelligence or all these new disruptive forms that you're talking about, pillars, which is like the aging nation, technology, trade flows, or even information flows, it's actually creating space for a more meaningful connection for humanity in itself. So I think that's one of the biggest change in organization structures.
So when I like the word that you use. You said the world does not have infinite resources, and Simon Sinek talks about infinite in another context. Yeah, correct.
Yes, yes.
And I think that was interesting, but that's a problem, right? We operate in a world that basically thinks that the world is
Infinite.
infinite, yeah.
Exactly.
And when COVID-19 pandemic crisis came about, it just stopped us in our tracks,
I
and then
know.
we kind of said, "Hey, look, let me just reevaluate my priorities."
Yes.
A few years ago, we used to talk about, when I say a few years ago, when I started out in my career, probably long time before you were even born, we had this very interesting conversation in the business schools. We used to say, oh, it took so many years for us to every home to get a phone, and then it took so many years for the aviation industry to make the world a much smaller place. Then we said, oh, the internet changed all of it. The internet penetration was different. And then we said, oh, Facebook changed that. But today, AI has put everybody to shame.
Yes,
All
that's so
right.
real.
Yeah, I
Yes.
don't think there's anyone who doesn't use ChatGPT or AI. But having said that, how do we actually stop and evaluate whether this disruption is actually for the positive or for the negative? Because I know you started off a startup at age 19, and you became the outstanding alumni of the Australian Malaysian Alumni Council. So, given that background, given that experience, having started out early, how do you feel that this is going to impact the economy, people at large?
I think when you ask, like, is this disruption good or bad? I cannot give you an answer just because every disruption that occurs has its own positive and negative consequences, right?
Sure, the pros and cons.
We're definitely going to see a lot of people be displaced in terms of their wealth, in terms of their capacity to work. But we're also going to see a big group of people who did not have the capacity to work prior to this obtain jobs, right? So there was this really cool study that I was watching or reading. It was basically about this father. His son suffered from stroke or basically lots of seizures, and he didn't understand. So he brought his son to the hospital. And what happens was the hospital gave him a terminology and bunch of big medical terms, and he didn't understand any of this. So what happens was he went home, used AI, and it broke down everything into simple to understand terms. And from there, the father started tracking his son's seizures, and now he's on the board of 12 different medical associations,
Wow.
finding a cure to save his son. I think when we talk about disruption, it's not about whether its impact is going to be positive or negative, but it's about how we use it, right? Just like artificial intelligence, just like mass production, it was really about what we decided to do with this technology or that actually created its purpose. I feel that humanity out and out is very bad at predicting our future and our past.
Of course.
We've always said like the world is ending 2020, 2000s, everyone's saying that, the world is ending, but that hasn't happened yet. We're very bad at predicting our futures, but perhaps I do see that when we start using or creating technologies with purpose, we start creating a better future. There's always going to be someone out there that wants to create something for a that case. At the end of the day, we don't want to create technology that becomes our masters. We need to create technology with a purpose. So every time I'm building technology, I first ask, why do you need this technology?
Right.
Because
right.
at the end of the day, You don't always need technology to replace everything in your life. You don't need them as customer service representatives most of the time. People choose to implement them just because they think it's efficient, they think it's effective. But let me give you a statistic. I think about $30 billion was actually put into the development of artificial intelligence in a lot of organizations all across the world, right? This is focusing on generative AI. 90% of those investments failed. And the reason is because companies are implementing technology for the sake of implementation and not for the sake of purpose. So that's where you see those negative results coming out. When do we decide a disruption is good? When we ask what's the purpose of this disruption. That's, I think, the key
Yeah,
importance.
I think I like that technology with the purpose, because I think sometimes people confuse purpose with goals.
So real,
And I
yes.
think Ranjay Gulati in Harvard Business School always talks about the purpose-driven organization. So when you say, of course, we always talk about it's not either it's bad or good, it's positive or negative, but how do we actually accentuate the positives and minimize the negatives, right?
Yes, maximizing good in
Right,
everything we do.
right. And one of the things that, of course, many people, when Facebook came out, probably in the mid 2000s, whatever, people said, "Oh, it helped me connect with friends. It helped me
Yes.
did this. It helped me that." But then, obviously, all of a sudden, what happens is, when technology becomes something that's commonplace, of course, there's always
Yes. Negatives,
costs
right? Yeah.
for misuse of it or abuse of it,
So,
right?
yes, I agree. So, basically, there is this really good framework that I like to use. It's created by Beard and Longstaff. It basically talks about how do we create technology with a good purpose. Among the frameworks are things like maximizing good. So, every technology that you're creating, create with the purpose of maximizing its good. Number two, consider all negative consequences and create guardrails to prevent them. At the end of the day, every technology that you're creating is going to have a negative output, but it is the technology developers' purpose that they create guardrails to prevent this from happening. So I give you an example, AI, ChatGPT. A lot of people started falling in love with ChatGPT. They were using them as therapists, as boyfriends, as husbands. And what happened was then a lot of people got so dependent on AI that ChatGPT had to completely change and remove this entire part of it. So people lost their partners overnight. But that is also a good thing because they don't want you to start humanizing AI. Have you noticed we've already called Siri and things like this he or she? We're already humanizing AI. And when we humanize AI, what happens is we start giving it a person, like we start treating it as a person, right? And we start feeling like, oh, this person did something wrong to us. But AI cannot do wrong to us. It's because of the prompts that we're putting in. And then that creates whose responsibility it is if the AI told you to kill someone. Is it the AI's fault? Is it the developer's fault? Or is it your fault? Right? So we need to be able to create safeguards in preventing us from anthropomorphizing AI.
So when you look at it, I think one of the things that when they talk about the four trends, and I remember the first time I went to Shanghai, I was a bit shocked because I couldn't believe it. It was all local technology and how they were able to do it. And then I found the age of urbanization. But in the book, one of the key things that kind of surprised me was that between 2010 and 2025, half of the global GDP will come from 440 cities in emerging markets that Western executives probably never heard of these cities. And that's a huge disruption because competition comes from unexpected sources. So when you talk about edutech and you talk about augmented reality in some of your work, I think you are kind of facing competition from unexpected cities, unexpected markets. And one of the things that the authors keep on reminding us, hey, the world is adding 7 Chicagos a year in terms of every year this is happening, and the global GDP is going to come from places that we have never heard of. So, what do you think this will impact on, say, someone who's doing business in Malaysia?
I love that statement just because I think it's time for a lot of old power to notice the rise and dominance of emerging economies. The best thing about emerging economies is that we were able to see the failures of that of a developed
Sure,
country
sure,
and learn from them, right?
sure.
And on top of that, what we're noticing is there's going to be a lot of competition just from our surrounding. Prior to this, we never probably took notice of our neighbors like Indonesia, Thailand, or even Vietnam. We just considered them, oh, they're just a developing economy. But I think the term developing or emerging economy is used too much and it's not being updated.
Sure,
We cannot base a country's success based purely on its GDP. We
sure,
need to think about how well they are managing their environment. We need to
sure.
think about its happiness index, things like this. So I think currently a lot of emerging countries are noticing that competition is very tight right now. But at the same time, they are creating or they're being very resourceful in creating ways to create a unique selling point. So they're not focused on mass production anymore. Mass production, you leave that to the US and China. But instead, emerging economies are finding niche areas in which they can fit themselves in things that suit their own market. Because, like you said, most of the GDP is actually coming from these emerging economies. These
Sure.
emerging economies are huge. We talk about Brazil, that's like 200 million people there. We talk about Indonesia itself, another 200 million. Southeast ASEAN is like what, 600?
700 million.
700 million people, right? So we have less of a need now to do trade with developed countries,
Exactly.
but instead within our own economy. So we're actually starting to develop a lot of localized solutions, industries, and manufacturing. So I think that that's the main change in the way organizations are
So
shifting.
consumption is going to come from different parts of the world.
Yes.
Yeah, it doesn't not have to be from the same areas that we thought it would be.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was nice that you talked about gross happiness index. And the other day I was listening to Gita Wirajawan, an Indonesian economist, and he talked about the gross dignity index.
Oh.
So, when you talk about gross happiness index, it's not about uh, it's going back to what you said. It's not just about what the technology is all about, but it's technology for a purpose.
Yes.
So the mobile phone it makes our world smaller. It keeps us interconnected. We can actually have a frequent communication. It's not that we're going to be lost or anything like that. But obviously, the downside to that is because it's convergence. Everything is on your mobile phone,
Yes.
and your mobile phone is probably far more powerful today than the supercomputers some years ago. Yeah. So okay, so we understand the age of urbanization is a huge thing beyond Shanghai, and like what you said, we just need to look at the impact it creates and then accentuate the positive and minimize the negative and ensure technology has a purpose. The second disruption that they talk about in the book is the scope, the scale, and the economic impact of technology. You are a young co-founder, and you have successfully scaled up, and you still talk about scaling up even more. So, what do you think is the impact of this second disruptive force? What are the opportunities and pitfalls that you feel that we can gain from? Yeah.
So, because I think this indicator is about trade, it's about economies, it's about information. What it really talks about is how much more information that we can receive to scale. And I think the amount of information currently in economies or just to the individual is amazingly huge. It's so big that it's disrupting the way that we are thinking. We're considering more about instead of just the wealth that our technology is able to create, we're also considering its sustainability, its impact on humans. So then I think it really helps us scale as well because to a certain degree, the only reason that people usually get technology from emerging countries is because it's cheap, right? But to compete internationally, you should no longer be cheap. You should be providing quality. But quality in what sense? Okay, fine, maybe you can give a cheaper price, but at the same time, perhaps you can add on to the impact of education. You can
Sure.
add on to the impact of sustainability and environmental friendliness. This globalization and flow of information not only makes it more easier to make a smart choice, it then allows us to make way for other choices that can implicate our actions, right? I think it's very important to look above wealth to consider other reasons. Because like we were talking about the GDP just now, and when we talk about GDP, what happens if we keep focusing on GDP or GDP per capita? We're not talking about the wealth disparity that is creating, right? The Gini index. So I think that similarly, when we're looking at the trade flows of economies and information, what we start considering then is not just the price of your technology, but the impact and purpose and scalability and sustainability, the positive impacts of it above money.
So you talked something very interesting. You said you primarily were talking about it doesn't have to be established countries anymore. So anyone can challenge anyone. So how have you been able to challenge some of the established players in the industry?
Yes, I definitely think that our main focus is actually on localization. So I don't believe in a blanket solution. I feel that when we work with economies all around, we primarily focus on emerging economies.
Sure.
Why is because they have a bigger need for technology that can actually create a purpose, right? They are countries like Brazil who are very, very wealthy. They have the Amazon forest,
Sure.
but they're only just building up their government buildings. So when I went there, they were like, "Oh wow, you're from Malaysia. You're anything that you've done there, please bring here." They look up to us and we go, okay, what are the current problems that you're facing? And then we think towards what kind of solutions that can actually fit them. So localization is a big part because if you know across a lot of emerging countries or cultures, they are actually very community driven countries that already have established societal guidelines. Like in Indonesia right now, instead of a traffic light, they actually have a person that physically holds up his
Sure.
hand, right, to stop cars from coming in. And he's not a paid person, but instead truck drivers will tip him because he's helping diverge the flow. So we don't want to disrupt that. We want to keep that as culture, as community, as something that's already working. Instead, we find technology that is able to localize and support these people. We're not looking to
Sure.
replace them. We're looking to kind of support and help the economy and the local structure.
Well, I like what you say. The guy just puts up the sign, yeah. And in some countries, I remember when I traveled with my family, I get stopped. At least about 6 times, 7 times, they would actually ask you, may I see your boarding pass, sir? So they would just have a paper, they will take. Then you go in there, they say, sir, can I check your passport? They would check. So I said, look, how many times have you checked? I'll get there. Then I realized, look, there's a cultural lag. You come from, probably if you go to Australia, you just swipe your passport and there's no human. It's just a machine, and you're just done in 2 minutes and you're gone. But then you go into another country, and because of the pressure on employment, pressure on creating jobs, you have 7, 8, 10 people checking your passport, checking your boarding
Yes.
pass, checking your tag. But then it's about adapting.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So every country is different. So when you go, like what you say, to Brazil, Brazil is different. But the impact of disruption could be varied in different markets, in different countries. But certainly one thing is the lag.
Yes.
I find that the lag is very important. It will hit all of us at some time or
will,
the other.
yes.
I remember as a student in India, it was impossible to get a telephone because telephones were very difficult. So you get to go to a public booth, and they used to call it as STD booth. And then you would actually make the telephone long distance, yeah. And then subsequently, a few years later, when I went there, I found even the gardeners have 2 telephones, yeah, one for the family. So I think the impact is there, but it's how we actually use.
Yes, I really agree with that because disruption shouldn't come in from your ideology. It's not wrong, it's just different. I think this is a
Correct.
big
Yeah.
statement that
Thank
a lot
you.
of
Yeah,
people
that's a
don't
good
understand.
one.
And at the same time, disruption doesn't need to come in based on Western ideologies. It's something, evolution naturally occurs based on people, based on things that we find of necessity, right? So I always feel that there's a need to provide everybody with a job. I do understand that in India and things like this, there's a lot of people checking
Yeah,
all the
yeah,
time.
exactly,
It's so
exactly.
real. But I noticed that in Australia, everything becomes automated.
Yep.
And automation brings efficiency, yes, but have you ever considered the algorithms that they're using to kind of pinpoint people? So what happens then is that everything is put into an artificial intelligence system to kind of profile people. Oh, you are a
Sure.
high risk, you are a low risk. But the algorithms that were put into this system are historically biased because there is no such thing as clean data or unbiased data. Data is based on what we feel. And if it's a person that's writing that data and putting in the annotations for the AI, that AI becomes inherently biased and is training off biased data. So that's just propagating biasness. And it's a very interesting statement because people always trust AI completely. We feel like a computer should be smarter than a human, but we forget that that computer is built by a human, which means that it is innate with human errors, right? So I do see a need for human inefficiencies as well within a system.
Yeah, I liked what you said. It's different. And another one that you said was, we use English all the time, but with populations in emerging countries, you find that English is no longer the lingua franca of the world.
Yes.
It could be Chinese, it could be Hindi, it could be Arabic. And I think it's very important for us to understand that, not to forget that. And one more thing that I always remember is, I remember that with population, whether it's growth or aging, there's a tremendous pressure on productivity.
Yes.
And that's where we hope that technology will kind of help.
Yes.
Would you agree?
I think that because there's such a fixation on creating population,
Right.
that there is a need for technology to come in to kind of support this disparity, right? But I also feel that if we stopped focusing and fixating on increasing production or population, then there will not be a need for technology to replace so many people's jobs. Or at least technology can then take the mundane jobs that do not require human capacity and human empathy and emotional intelligence. So it's kind of like a chicken and an egg situation, but I'm definitely one towards the maybe we don't need as many humans as we think. At the end of the day, resources are finite. Maybe let's try to preserve
Whether the
some
world
of
can
it.
support.
Yes, because technology does, I have to admit, technology does create a big gap for us to suddenly consider sustainability. It basically gives us that next step. It's kind of like medicine. It gives us longer lives, which means that we can use that life to consider better technology to then improve our lives. So
And I think they talk about trend 3, where they talk about aging populations, declining fertility rates. So how tough is it going to be for the governments to support the aging populations? Or like what Professor Milton Friedman said, immigration is good if it comes for skills, but it's not good if it comes for welfare. But then if people are aged, it's a geriatric issue, then obviously you do have a challenge, don't you?
Yes, I think from an individual's perspective, I heard one of the oldest sushi chefs in the world. He said that the reason why I live so long, he's past 100 now, right? 104, is because I work. So to a certain degree, I don't think that work is bad. From an individual's capacity, I feel that the older you are, the wiser you are.
And you contribute.
And you can contribute back. It comes from a place where if you're unable to contribute back to society, that's when people start looking at you as, oh, maybe you have no worth or no value. But that's something that I don't believe in, because I do feel that the older population have so much more to give to society if you only give them a chance. In our company, we try to hire people above 50 or 60 because I'm a young person and I come in with a lot of energy and ideas. But the thing is, the world has structure and rules for a reason. And sometimes I cannot understand that. And it takes someone who's more experienced and older to me could kind of educate me about the rules of society.
Yeah.
Because I come in trying to disrupt,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
And that's just not the way the world works. When you disrupt something, it's very hard for people to accept. You need to understand the rules of society and kind of go in incrementally.
I have a friend of mine, Tan Sri Limbichai, who's an executive chairman of Top Glove Corporation, one of Malaysia's billionaires. And he always says he works 365, 24/7. He says he works every day because you see, there is a cost. And therefore, I need, because work is what I do best.
Yes.
And I need to kind of be energized. And that's something that he says all the time. But it's also important for us to remember that, look, we want people to be productive, and
Yes.
as long as people are productive, and they just need to adapt with all these disruptions that come about. But one of the things that Professor Clayton Christensen said in the Harvard Business School with his famous work, Disruptive Innovation, he said it's smaller companies were the ones who go and disrupt larger corporations. For example, he talks about Netflix,
Yes.
which completely disrupted
The
the
entire
blockbuster
entertainment.
video
Yeah.
completely, or nuclear steel mills. They completely disrupted the massive steel mills. And it's always because they found a way to do it better, more
Yes.
productive, quicker, faster, and that's how they went to do it. But the last trend, just moving on, they talk about is the flows, because it's an interconnected world, and I think you're in edutech, fintech, and you see how things change. Trade, data, people, information flows in an interconnected world is huge. It's massive. So, in that kind of a context, Natalie, how do you find that your company, your own organization, is going to uh, be resilient, is going to adapt, is going to manage?
I honestly think there's too much information in the world right nowadays. It's making all our new generations anxious and stressed because there's so much information in the world and we don't know what to do with it, right? I think as an organization focused on education technology, we try, especially with a vulnerable community such as the youth, we try our best to provide them with education that we deem fit, but at the same time, it's also about educating children and allowing them to do that choice upon themselves. Because sometimes things may not agree with us, but it's also information that they need to learn. It is up to a person to do whatever they want to do with that information. But if they never get that opportunity to learn, then they cannot make an informed decision. So, as an education technology company, what we basically do is sort through all the noise. We get that important information that, well, maybe your country is pushing out as national building pillars like digital literacy, artificial intelligence literacy, or even
Sure.
financial literacy. And then we push that down to the students. And of course, the students can then learn the different modes of financial investments, what suits me best. It's about kind of building or shielding them or providing them that ability to understand what is right and wrong. And then
Yeah.
from there, what they want to do with it is up to
So,
them.
what you're trying to do is trying to make a difference
Yeah.
to the quality of learning.
Education, yes. I think education is literally the most important thing that we can ever have in our life. It's lifelong. Learning is constant, and there's so much things that we can do with
And
education.
as Nelson Mandela said, the world is going to be a better place only with education. It's
Yes, yes.
intergenerational mobility. Just wanted to move on as we come to the end of the podcast. Just wanted to just move on to the one more very important question. You talked about hiring people 50 years of age, 60 years of age. And I remember the movie Intern.
Yes, I love
Yeah,
that
you
show.
remember that? Yeah, and the guy has clarity.
Yes.
Of course, he's slower in certain other things. He's not as fast as the other young people are on the computer, but he does it in his own way. So, what has your experience been? How have these older people coped when these kind of disruptive forces are creating a huge impact on the world?
The crazy thing is, I think they're coping perfectly fine because they are much more resilient than I am. I come in sometimes confused, too high strung, and I'm like, everything's falling apart. They come in and it's like, it's not the end of the world. I've been through this 10 times already. Let me show you what I've done, right? It's about kind of learning from their experience because history repeats itself, just in different forms. From mass production, now it's artificial intelligence, right? So it's kind of listening to them and understanding what they do. But at the same time, something I noticed about a lot of individuals working in their 50s and 60s and above is their thirst for knowledge. They're very resourceful and they are very willing to learn. Granted, sometimes they don't want to do the PowerPoints and things like this. They let the interns do that. But they're so eloquent in their words and they're so happy to share knowledge that sometimes I hope we would just sit down and listen as well. Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I'm on the other side, you're on the other side, and I find that one of the things that you need to go through the experience to get that experience.
I agree. I agree. Sometimes we try to get that shortcut and it doesn't
You
work.
might be brighter or you might be intellectual, but sometimes some of the senior citizens have that. But of course, the disruption is real. There's no
Yes.
doubt about it. And so, as the world operating system is being rewritten, I call it rewritten, by these four trends or the no ordinary disruption, as they call it. What would you think that we need to do? Maybe 2 or 3 points that you think we could take away in order to remain sane, to use the word that you used, purposeful, and to also use another word you used, to be happy in the future.
I think one is the key theme that we've been talking about today, education. Constantly learning is something that keeps you grounded, it keeps you sane, and it allows you to kind of sort through the noise. Which brings me to the second one, the ability to discern real and fake. I think with the mass artificial intelligence information out there, I think about 50 to 60% of all information generated online is AI. So imagine AI just creating more fake news and fake news.
Sure.
It's very important for us to create that ability of discernment.
Sure.
Right? And the third one is happiness. Sometimes we need to look at life as more than just work and productivity, but also about creating a space for ourselves as we're moving on to our 80s, to our hundreds. How can we create that lifelong learning and purpose as opposed to thinking about it as it is just a 9 to 5 grind? I think that is the 3 key takeaways that I have from today's conversation.
Lovely. So I will take away one thing, which is creating the space.
Yes.
I need to find that space to continue to remain productive and continue to be on the journey of lifelong learning. Natalie, it has been a pleasure discussing with you on the theme of no ordinary disruption. And I know that you have a great company, a young company, UnBound, that's touching the many young lives, teaching them how to learn in a different way, in a more productive way. I hope and I wish that you'll be Malaysia's next unicorn, and good luck and all the best. And thank you for being here.
Thank you for having
Thank you.
me.
Thank you. Thank you. Terima kasih. Thank you.